A veteran gave up everything for his late wife's family, but God had another plan. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. In a small town nestled between rolling hills and quiet streets, there was a man named John Carter, a former Army veteran who had been living a quiet, somewhat solitary life ever since his wife, Sarah, passed away 2 years ago. John had given up everything for his late wife's family. He had no children of his own, but he had inherited her family's burdens after her sudden death. The debts, the emotional weight, the responsibility, it all fell on his shoulders. He had given up his own dreams, his own future, to care for the family that Sarah had loved dearly. But what John didn't know was that the journey ahead was far from ordinary. It started on a cold November morning when John sat at the old wooden kitchen table, staring out the window at the gray sky. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of his coffee mug. He hadn't been sleeping well, his mind constantly racing with worries about the future. The house he and Sarah had shared for so many years now felt too big, too empty. John had no idea how long he could continue this life, living for others, sacrificing his own happiness. His wife's family was grateful for his help, but they had their own lives to lead. They had their own families, their own priorities. John had always felt like a stranger among them, a man out of place in a family he wasn't born into. He had no regrets for caring for them, but lately, the weight of it all had begun to wear him down. On that particular morning, as the wind howled outside, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. He stood up, startled, and made his way to the front door. There, standing on the porch, was Sarah's brother, Paul, a man who had never quite seen eye to eye with John. Paul's face was stern, his eyes focused. Without a word, he handed John an envelope, marked with an official-looking seal. "It's from Sarah's estate," Paul said flatly before turning and walking away without another word. John stood frozen on the porch, the cold wind biting at his face as he stared at the envelope in his hand. What could this be? A legal matter? Something related to Sarah's family? John had dealt with enough of those over the past 2 years. Hesitant but curious, he opened the envelope, revealing a letter that would change everything. It read, "Dear John, we are aware of the sacrifice you have made in caring for Sarah's family. You have honored our daughter's memory in ways we could never repay. But we have a secret we must now share with you. There is something important, something meant for you, hidden in the attic of Sarah's childhood home. We trust you will know what to do with it. Yours faithfully, the estate of Sarah Carter." John's heart raced. The letter felt like a whisper from the past, a message from Sarah herself. But what could this secret be? And why now, after all this time, was it being revealed? John stood there for a moment, the envelope still in his hands, as the wind howled around him. He didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a journey that would not only change his life, but also uncover a mystery that had been buried for decades. A mystery that would lead him to a truth far greater than he could have ever imagined. John stood in the doorway, the cold wind biting at his face, as the envelope trembled slightly in his hands. He had read the letter twice, trying to absorb the words, but still, they felt too surreal, too improbable. What secret could Sarah's family have hidden for so long? Why had they chosen now, after everything, to reveal it to him? His eyes traced the lines of the letter again, but the words gave no further explanation. It was a riddle, an invitation to something unknown. His heart pounded with a mixture of excitement and dread. Without another thought, he grabbed his coat and stepped outside, the door clicking shut behind him. The drive to Sarah's childhood home was long and quiet. The road twisted through dense forests, with the occasional clearing revealing fields now blanketed in snow. John could feel the weight of the past hanging heavy in the air, as though the trees themselves held memories of Sarah's youth. The house stood at the end of a narrow dirt road, nestled between towering pines. It was a modest home, weathered by time, its paint peeling and windows clouded with dust. Sarah had always spoken fondly of it, of her childhood here, but the place felt different now. Empty, lonely. He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the house. It seemed almost as if it were waiting for him, for this moment. He wondered, for the 100th time, what had been left behind for him. Slowly, John got out of the truck and made his way to the front door, the gravel crunching beneath his boots. He fumbled with the old key Paul had given him and unlocked the door, which creaked open with a low groan. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and old wood. The house was quiet, save for the soft whisper of the wind outside. John stepped inside, the familiar feeling of the place washing over him. He hadn't been here since Sarah's funeral. There were echoes of her everywhere, the faint smell of her perfume in the corners, the family photographs lining the walls, the soft creak of the stairs as he made his way upstairs. He followed the letter's instructions, making his way to the attic. The staircase was narrow, and the air grew colder with each step. When he reached the top, he noticed a trapdoor in the far corner, almost hidden behind a stack of old boxes. It wasn't until he moved a few boxes aside that he saw it clearly. The hatch was old, its wood cracked and splintered from years of neglect. John's hands shook as he reached for the handle. The letter had said that something important was hidden here, something meant for him. Could it really be true? With a deep breath, he pulled the trapdoor open. A rush of cold air greeted him, carrying the scent of something musty and forgotten. He grabbed the flashlight from his pocket and shined it into the dark space below. The beam flickered for a moment before revealing a narrow staircase leading down into the shadows. The feeling of anticipation gnawed at his gut, and yet, something else, something deeper, told him this was not just about treasure. This was about closure. Sarah's family had trusted him with something they had kept hidden for years. John took a hesitant step down into the darkness. The stairs creaked under his weight, and the beam of the flashlight swept across old, weathered shelves filled with boxes of forgotten memories. At the bottom of the stairs, he paused. The room was small but filled with the kind of quiet that made it feel like a sanctuary. He stepped forward, and his foot brushed against something soft. He looked down and saw a dusty, old leather-bound book lying on the floor. It was thick, its edges worn from time, and it seemed to call out to him. He bent down and picked it up, his fingers trembling as he opened the cover. The pages were yellowed with age, but the handwriting was clear and neat. As he read, John's eyes widened with disbelief. It was a journal, Sarah's journal, filled with entries from her childhood, from the time before they had met. The words spoke of dreams, of hopes, of things Sarah had never shared with him. But it wasn't just a diary. The last few pages were different. They were filled with names, dates, and addresses, followed by cryptic notes. A map of sorts, but it was clear that it was not just any map. It was a map of the property, the land around Sarah's childhood home. And it was marked with something more, a hidden vault, a treasure, something worth far more than just money. It was then that John realized the truth. Sarah's family hadn't just left him a house. They had left him a legacy, a secret that had been kept hidden for generations. This wasn't just about money. It was about a deeper, more profound gift, something that had the power to change everything. But as John stood there, holding the journal in his hands, a sense of unease crept over him. What did it all mean? And why had they chosen him to uncover it now? The answer, he realized, was somewhere in the shadows of the past, waiting for him to discover it. John stared at the journal in his hands, trying to process the words on the pages. The cryptic notes, the map, and the addresses, they didn't make sense at first. But as his eyes scanned the pages again, a faint connection began to form in his mind. It was more than just a record of Sarah's childhood. It was a roadmap, a guide to something deeper, something hidden right under his nose for years. The map showed various spots on the land surrounding Sarah's childhood home, but one spot stood out. It was marked clearly with a bold X next to a set of coordinates. Hidden vault, the note beside it read. John's heart began to race. What was this vault? Was it something his wife's family had been protecting all these years? He had to find out. As he placed the journal back in his bag, his mind raced with questions. The storm outside had passed, but the weight of the discovery still hung heavily in the air. He needed answers. John knew where the vault was supposed to be, but there was something inside him that told him this wasn't just about treasure. This was about the legacy of a family, about secrets that had been kept hidden for generations. As he walked through the attic and back down the creaking staircase, a sense of unease settled in his chest. The house, though familiar, felt strange now. Everything seemed to be speaking to him, as if the walls were whispering the stories of the past. He stepped out into the cold air, the ground beneath his feet hard with the remnants of the storm. The sun had begun to set, casting a soft golden light over the snow-covered fields. John walked across the yard toward the small barn at the edge of the property, the map still fresh in his mind. The coordinates on the page pointed him in that direction. As he reached the barn, he paused, staring at the structure. It looked as though it hadn't been used in years. The roof sagged slightly, and the wooden door was half off its hinges. He reached for the door, pushing it open with a creak, and stepped inside. The barn smelled of old hay and dust. The interior was dim, with only a few rays of sunlight filtering through the cracks in the walls. John moved carefully, scanning the area for anything that seemed out of place. The map had been clear. It was here, somewhere in the barn. He paced back and forth, trying to make sense of it. The barn wasn't large, but it felt overwhelming in the silence. His boots scraped against the wooden floor as he made his way to the back, where the barn's walls seemed sturdier. That's when he noticed it, a loose floorboard, slightly raised at one corner. His heart skipped a beat. Was this it? Could this be the hidden vault? He crouched down, pulling at the floorboard, and with a groan, it lifted away. Beneath it was a small compartment, dark and narrow. John felt a chill run down his spine as he reached inside, his hand brushing against something cold and metal. He pulled out a small, rusted box, no bigger than a shoebox. The box was locked, but there was a keyhole on its side. He stared at it, feeling the weight of what he was holding. Could this be the vault he had read about in the journal? As John examined the box, his mind raced with possibilities. This wasn't just an ordinary discovery. It was something that had been waiting for him all this time, hidden right under his feet. But as he turned the box over in his hands, he noticed something strange. Engraved into the metal was a name, Carter. His breath caught in his throat. Was this a message from Sarah? Or was it something more? The wind outside howled again, the sound of it filling the barn with a sense of urgency. John couldn't wait any longer. He had to know what was inside. He searched his pockets for the key he had found earlier, the one that had come with the letter from Sarah's family. With a shaking hand, he inserted the key into the lock. There was a soft click, and the box opened. Inside, wrapped in a faded piece of cloth, was a collection of old documents. John carefully unfolded the cloth, his fingers trembling. The first document he pulled out was a letter, written in a flowing script. It was addressed to Sarah's family, but it wasn't from them. It was from a man named James Carter, Sarah's great-grandfather. The letter was dated back to the early 1900s, and it spoke of a secret so important that it had to be kept hidden. As John read through the letter, the world around him seemed to fade away. James Carter had written about a fortune, a hidden legacy, that could change everything for the family. But it wasn't just money. It was something more, a connection to the land, to their heritage, and to the power of what had been passed down through generations. This secret, James had said, would only be revealed when the time was right. And that time, it seemed, had come. John's heart raced. The answers he had been seeking were right here, in his hands. This discovery wasn't just about him or Sarah's family. It was about a legacy that had been waiting for the right person to uncover it. But as he looked down at the documents in his hands, a new realization dawned on him. The legacy wasn't just about treasure or wealth. It was about something much deeper, something that would change his life forever. John held the letter in his hands, the weight of its contents pressing on him. His heart raced as he absorbed the words, the promises of a secret long kept by Sarah's family. It was more than a family legacy. It was a revelation, one that could change everything. The letter spoke of a fortune, but it wasn't one made of gold or jewels. It was a legacy of the land itself, of the values passed down through generations, waiting for the right moment to emerge. John felt a sense of responsibility settle in his chest. He had always wondered why he was the one chosen to care for Sarah's family, why he had to give up so much for them. Now it was clear. This wasn't just a random act of fate. It was a purpose, something larger than he could have ever imagined. The next step was clear. He needed to uncover what had been hidden all these years. The documents in his hands contained clues, but it was the map that intrigued him the most. He had seen the markings before, but they now felt like a guide, pointing him towards something that had been waiting for him all along. The coordinates on the map led him to a small creek that ran along the edge of the property. The map indicated a specific spot, marked with a circle, but it wasn't just about finding a location. It was about what lay beneath. John had spent countless hours working on the farm, tending to the land, but he had never noticed anything unusual about the creek. Yet, according to the letter, this was where everything would change. He grabbed a shovel from the barn and made his way to the creek. The cold air nipped at his skin as he walked, the ground hard with frost beneath his boots. The creek was a familiar sight, winding its way through the property, but there was something about it now that felt different, as though it was hiding something. John knelt by the water, scanning the area where the map indicated the spot. His fingers traced the ground, feeling for anything out of place. After a few moments, his hand brushed against something solid. A hidden object, buried beneath the earth. His pulse quickened. This was it. He cleared away the dirt, revealing a rusted metal lid. It was old, its surface covered with moss and grime, but it was unmistakably a door. With a deep breath, John pulled at the handle. The lid creaked open with a loud groan, and the air that rushed out smelled musty, as though it had been sealed away for decades. John grabbed the flashlight from his pocket and peered into the darkness below. The shaft descended into the earth, and at the bottom, he could make out the faint outline of a door. It was solid, reinforced with metal, and there was a small keyhole. This was no ordinary storage space. It was a vault, just as the letter had described. The question was, what was inside? The mystery that had been hidden from Sarah's family for so long was finally within reach. But John knew that unlocking this secret wouldn't just be a matter of finding treasure. It would be the key to understanding everything. The sacrifices, the struggles, and the choices that had shaped the past. As he stepped down into the darkness, he felt a deep sense of connection to the land, to Sarah, and to the family he had sworn to protect. The further he descended, the more he could feel that he was being drawn into something far larger than himself. The walls of the shaft were made of stone, cool to the touch, and they echoed with each step he took. The air was thick with dust, and John's breathing grew heavier as he reached the bottom. There, before him, stood the door. It was heavy, made of iron, and adorned with intricate carvings. The patterns on the door were unlike anything John had ever seen, and for a moment, he wondered if they held some kind of hidden meaning. As he approached, the key in his pocket seemed to grow warmer, as though it were calling out to him. His fingers trembled as he inserted the key into the lock. There was a click, followed by the sound of the door slowly creaking open. The space beyond was dimly lit, but the light from his flashlight revealed shelves filled with old crates and boxes. John moved closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He opened the nearest box and found old, weathered papers, documents, letters, and maps. Things that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. As he sifted through the papers, one particular document caught his eye. It was a will, signed by Sarah's great-grandfather, James Carter. The will detailed the transfer of land, but there was more. It spoke of a trust, one that had been established to protect the family's legacy, but with a condition. Only the person who truly understood the family's values would be able to access it. John's mind raced. Could this be why he was chosen? The letter had mentioned the timing, that the secret would be revealed when the time was right. And now, here he was, standing in the vault, holding the key to the family's future. The legacy of the Carter family wasn't just about land or wealth. It was about values, about honor, and about the strength of family. John understood now that this was why he had been asked to give up everything. It was his purpose, his calling. As he stood in the vault, holding the documents that would change everything, John realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for. The past, the present, and the future were all connected, and he was the one who would ensure that the legacy lived on. As John stood in the vault, holding the family will and looking over the aged documents, a sudden weight of responsibility pressed upon him. He was no longer just a man trying to make a living. He had become the keeper of a legacy. The pages in his hands were more than just old paper. They were the link to generations past, a bridge between history and the future of Sarah's family. The will, signed by Sarah's great-grandfather, was clear in its intention. It spoke of trust, of promises made, and of responsibilities that could only be passed down to someone who truly understood the meaning of sacrifice and loyalty. The letters described how the family's land had been held in trust, and how it could only be inherited by one who had proven their worth through selflessness. John's heart beat faster as he realized that the family's future now rested on his shoulders. He had spent so much time giving to Sarah's family, taking care of them, but now, it felt as if he was being tested. The documents were not just about land or wealth. They were about a family's honor, about keeping promises made long ago. John felt the weight of it all, but strangely, he also felt ready. This was his purpose. This was why he had given up everything. As he closed the box and carefully placed the documents back inside, a sense of clarity washed over him. He had been part of this family's history all along, and now, he would carry it forward. The vault, hidden for generations, was no longer just a secret. It was the key to the future. But even as John prepared to leave the vault, a new question arose. What exactly did this legacy mean for him? The land? The responsibility? The riches? His fingers brushed over the old maps once again, tracing the lines of the property, and for the first time, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. A second set of coordinates was written in the margins of one of the maps. These coordinates led to a place near the river on the far side of the property. John's curiosity was piqued. What was waiting there? Why was this second location marked so carefully? The letter had mentioned a second part to the inheritance, something that would come to light when the time was right. He had thought that part of the mystery had already been uncovered, but now he wasn't so sure. He couldn't ignore it. This was more than just a final act of loyalty. It was a step towards something greater, something that would tie together everything he had learned, everything he had given. The storm had cleared, and the moon was now high in the sky, casting a pale light over the land. John knew what he had to do. He grabbed the flashlight from his bag and set out toward the river. The night was cold, and his breath formed clouds in the crisp air. The land stretched before him, dark and silent, but there was something in the air tonight, something that told him he was on the verge of something important. The sound of the river grew louder as he approached, and soon, he was standing at its edge, staring into the water. The moonlight shimmered across the surface, casting eerie reflections. As he stepped closer, he noticed a large rock formation on the other side of the river, just where the map had indicated. There was something about it that felt significant, something that beckoned him. The moonlight illuminated the space around it, revealing a narrow path leading through the trees. John hesitated for a moment, then crossed the river, his boots sinking into the cold water. He climbed the bank and followed the path, his heart pounding in his chest. The deeper he went, the more he felt the weight of history closing in around him. It was as if the land itself was whispering, telling him he was on the right path. The trail wound through the trees, eventually leading him to a clearing. In the center of the clearing, half covered in moss, was a stone structure. It was ancient, its edges worn down by time, but it was clear that it had been built with purpose. A feeling of awe swept over John as he approached. He had found something that had been hidden for generations, waiting for the right person to discover it. The structure was a small stone building, perhaps once a chapel or a family monument, its entrance sealed by a heavy wooden door. But as John stepped closer, he noticed something strange. The door was not locked. In fact, it seemed to invite him in. He reached for the handle, his hand trembling. When the door swung open, he was greeted by the smell of old wood and damp earth. Inside, the air was cool, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere in the shadows. As John stepped inside, his flashlight illuminated the walls, revealing strange carvings. The symbols were unfamiliar to him, but they felt significant. He moved deeper into the room, and there, in the center, was a stone altar. It was covered with intricate designs, and on top of it lay a small box. The box, unlike the one he had found in the barn, was made of gold, its surface engraved with delicate patterns. John felt his pulse quicken. Could this be the final part of the legacy? The final piece of the puzzle? He reached for the box, and as his fingers touched the cold metal, a faint hum filled the air. The box creaked open, revealing a small, folded letter inside. The letter was old, its edges frayed, but it was still legible. As John unfolded it, he read the words written by Sarah's great-grandfather. The letter spoke of a final gift, a blessing passed down to the one who proved worthy. This gift, John realized, was not one of wealth or property. It was a gift of knowledge, a knowledge that would guide him through the challenges ahead. He now understood that the true legacy was not in what was left behind, but in what could be given forward. John stood in the dimly lit room, holding the golden box in his hands, the letter from Sarah's great-grandfather still fresh in his mind. The words he had read echoed through his thoughts, but something was still unclear. The true legacy was not about wealth, nor land. It was knowledge, a deeper understanding of the family's past, and perhaps a guide to the future. As the letter had stated, the final gift could only be given to the one who proved worthy. But worthy of what? What was the next step? He stared at the golden box, feeling its weight, not just physically but emotionally. There was something about this moment, standing here, that made him realize that his life had been leading to this very point. The sacrifices he had made, the years of living for others, it had all prepared him for this. But what exactly was he meant to do with this gift? The hum in the air seemed to pulse once more, as if urging him forward. He gently opened the box, its hinges creaking softly. Inside was a small, intricately carved stone, smooth to the touch. It was heavier than it looked, its surface covered in delicate symbols. John turned it over in his hands, feeling the warmth of it, as though it had been waiting for him to hold it. The stone felt alive with history, with the weight of those who had come before him. It was clear that it wasn't just an artifact. It was part of something greater. John had spent so many years caring for Sarah's family, living in the shadow of her memory, but this moment felt different. It felt as though this stone was a link, not just to the past, but to a future he hadn't yet imagined. He slipped it into his pocket and made his way back through the forest to the house. The air had grown colder, the shadows of the trees stretching longer as the sun dipped below the horizon. He had no idea where the stone would lead him, but he knew one thing for certain. This was the turning point. This was the moment when everything he had given, every sacrifice, would finally come full circle. When he reached the house, he immediately went to the study, sitting at Sarah's old desk. The maps and documents scattered across the desk seemed to glow with new meaning now. He spread them out in front of him, examining them carefully, his mind racing as he traced the markings on the paper. The symbols on the stone seemed to match some of the designs on the maps. As he looked closer, he saw that the coordinates on the map pointed to a different location, one further up the mountain, near the old chapel that had been abandoned for years. This was where the next part of the puzzle was hidden. The letter had spoken of finding the vault, but it also mentioned something more, a hidden power, a force that had been protecting the family's land for generations. John's hand trembled as he marked the location on the map. The chapel, abandoned for so long, seemed like the final destination. The journey was far from over, but now, John could feel it deep in his bones. The answers were there, in the heart of the mountains. He couldn't wait any longer. He grabbed his jacket, pulled on his boots, and made his way outside. The cold air bit at his face as he started up the path that wound toward the mountain. He wasn't sure what he would find, but he knew it would be the key to unlocking everything. The legacy, the mystery, and the purpose he had been searching for. The mountain loomed ahead, its peaks dusted. With snow, a silence hanging in the air like a blanket. As he ascended the trail, the world around him seemed to grow quieter, the only sound being the crunch of his boots on the snow. The closer he got to the chapel, the more he felt the pull of something ancient, something that had been waiting for him. When he finally reached the chapel, it was even more imposing than he had imagined. The building, though weathered and worn, still stood tall against the mountain's winds. The door creaked as he pushed it open, the interior dark and cold. The air inside smelled of mildew and old stone, but there was something else, something unfamiliar, like the scent of something long hidden. He stepped inside, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The chapel had been abandoned for decades, but the silence here felt different. It was as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for him to discover the truth. As he explored the room, he noticed a raised platform at the far end of the chapel. Atop it was an altar, its surface covered in dust. But unlike the rest of the chapel, this area seemed untouched. The air around it felt charged, like electricity in the air before a storm. John walked up to the altar, his breath shallow as he knelt down. The stone surface was cold to the touch, but something glowed faintly beneath it. He reached for the stone, the one he had found in the vault, and placed it carefully on the altar. As soon as the stone made contact, the chapel seemed to come alive. The air shifted, and the faint glow beneath the altar grew brighter. John's heart pounded in his chest as the ground beneath him trembled slightly. He pulled back, unsure of what was happening. But then, from beneath the altar, a compartment slowly opened. Inside, there was a small chest, its surface adorned with intricate carvings. It was identical to the vault he had found earlier, but this chest felt different, more significant. The symbols on the chest matched those on the stone. As John opened it, the chest revealed its contents, a small key and a note. The note, written in the same flowing script as the letter, read, "The final piece is within you. The key will open the door, but only if you are ready to understand." John held the small key in his hand, feeling the weight of it pressing against his palm. The note inside the chest had been clear. The key will open the door, but only if you are ready to understand. The words echoed in his mind as he stared at the key, uncertain of what it meant. Ready to understand? What was he missing? What had he failed to see until now? The faint glow from the altar still lingered in the air, and as John moved towards the back of the chapel, he noticed something that hadn't caught his attention before. A small door hidden behind a tapestry that hung loosely against the stone wall. The door was almost unnoticeable unless one knew exactly where to look, and John's pulse quickened as he approached. He ran his fingers along the edges, feeling for any handle or clue. Then, as his hand traced over the doorframe, he found it. A small indentation, just large enough for the key. He inserted the key into the slot, and with a deep breath, he turned it. The door creaked as it slowly opened, revealing a narrow passage that descended into the darkness below. The air in the passage felt cool and damp, and the musty scent of old stone filled John's nostrils. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what lay ahead, but something inside him urged him to continue. With a steadying breath, he stepped through the doorway and into the unknown. The passage was narrow, the stone walls rough and uneven. The only light came from the small torch he had taken from the chapel, which cast long shadows as he moved forward. Each step seemed to echo through the narrow corridor, and the silence around him felt heavy, almost suffocating. The passage seemed to go on for what felt like miles, twisting and turning, until finally, John reached the end. There, in the center of the room, was a pedestal, and on it lay an ornate box. The box was much larger than the one he had found in the barn, its surface engraved with the same intricate designs as the stone he had discovered earlier. John approached the pedestal, his breath quickening as he placed his hand on the box. He could feel the energy in the room shift, as though the very air itself had come alive. He hesitated for a moment before opening the box, unsure of what he might find. Inside, there was a single piece of parchment, yellowed with age. It was a letter, written in the same flowing script as the ones he had found earlier. The letter read, "The legacy you have uncovered is not one of wealth or land, but one of understanding. The key to this inheritance lies not in what you can see, but in what you can feel. The power of this legacy is within you, but only if you are willing to embrace it." John felt a sense of realization wash over him. The key had not just been a physical object. It was a symbol, a guide to unlocking something deeper within him. This inheritance was not about money or possessions. It was about understanding the value of sacrifice, the importance of loyalty, and the strength of family. The letter had spoken of a power, a force that had been passed down through generations. It was not just a power that could be used for personal gain. It was a power meant to protect, to guide, and to ensure that the family's legacy would live on. John's heart raced as he turned the letter over. On the back, there was another inscription. "The legacy will live on through those who are willing to fight for it. Protect it, and it will protect you." John knew in that moment that this was why he had been chosen. This was why he had given up everything. He had been prepared for this moment, even though he hadn't known it. The legacy was not just about the past, it was about the future. He was the one who would carry it forward, who would protect it and ensure that it would not be lost to time. He stood there for a long while, absorbing the weight of his discovery. The silence in the room felt different now, peaceful, almost reverent. The power of the legacy was not something that could be seen or touched. It was something that had to be felt, deep within his soul. John finally closed the box and left the room, feeling a sense of clarity he hadn't known in years. The journey wasn't over yet, but he now understood the true nature of the inheritance he had uncovered. It was not a gift to be taken lightly. It was a responsibility, a duty that would require him to be more than just a man. He had to be a protector, a guardian of the family's legacy. As John stepped back into the chapel, the door behind him slowly closed, sealing the room off from the world outside. The quiet stillness of the chapel felt like a sanctuary now, a place where the past and the future converged. He was ready. The next step in his journey would be to honor the legacy, to protect it, and to ensure that it would never be lost. The key to the inheritance had not been just the physical key he had turned. It was the understanding he had gained, the realization that the power of the legacy was within him all along. And now, it was time to act. John stood in the chapel, the heavy doors slowly closing behind him, sealing off the dimly lit room from the outside world. The silence that followed felt different now, filled with a quiet understanding. The letter, the key, the documents, everything had led him here, to this moment. The legacy was not something that could be held in a box or measured by wealth. It was a burden, a responsibility passed down through the ages. As John walked back toward the altar, his mind raced with what he had just uncovered. The family's legacy was not a treasure to be possessed. It was a cause to be protected, a story to be carried forward. The realization hit him like a wave, crashing over him with a force he couldn't escape. This was more than just about Sarah's family or their land. It was about the future, and he was the one chosen to ensure that future was secured. He knew now what he had to do. There was no going back. John left the chapel and made his way back to the house, the weight of his discovery heavy on his shoulders. The mountain loomed ahead, dark and silent against the night sky, and yet he felt a strange sense of peace. It was as if the land itself had accepted him, as if he had become a part of it. His mind wandered back to the letter and the words he had read earlier. The legacy will live on through those who are willing to fight for it. Protect it, and it will protect you. The message was clear. This wasn't just about keeping a secret hidden in the shadows. It was about standing up for what mattered, about being willing to sacrifice for the greater good. As he arrived at the house, John paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the familiar building. It had always felt like a home, but now, it felt more like a fortress. He had been living in its shadow, carrying its weight without truly understanding the responsibility. Now, it was time to step forward and make sure that the legacy was honored, that the family story was carried on. He walked inside, his boots echoing against the wooden floor. The house was quiet still. His eyes scanned the familiar rooms, each one holding memories of his time here with Sarah. But now, those memories seemed distant, like they belonged to someone else. He was no longer just the man who had lost his wife. He was the guardian of something much larger. The future of the family depended on him, and he knew that he couldn't do it alone. As he stood in the living room, his mind began to churn with plans, with ideas of what needed to be done. The land, the family, and the legacy, these were the things that mattered now. He couldn't let them slip away into the past. John's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone, but as he walked toward the door, he felt a sense of calm. Whoever it was, he was ready. He opened the door to find Paul, Sarah's brother, standing on the porch, his expression grim. "John," Paul said, his voice low, "we need to talk." John stepped aside, allowing Paul to enter. The two men stood in the living room, the tension palpable. Paul's eyes were dark, his face drawn. "I know what you found," Paul said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I'm not sure I'm ready for it." John took a deep breath, his heart pounding. "You don't have to be ready," he said quietly. "But this is something that needs to be done. The family's future is at stake." Paul looked at him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've known for a long time that this day would come, but I never imagined it would be like this. I thought we could just keep going, keep things as they were. But the truth is, we've been living in the past. We've been holding on to things that don't matter anymore." John nodded, understanding more than Paul realized. The family had been stuck in a cycle, refusing to let go of what had been, and in doing so, they had forgotten what could be. "It's time for change," John said, his voice firm. "We can't keep living in the shadows of the past. We need to move forward, for Sarah, for all of us." Paul swallowed hard, his eyes brimming with tears. I don't know how to start, he said. I've been holding on to this land, this legacy, because it was all we had left. But I don't know if I can carry it alone. John placed a hand on his shoulder, offering reassurance. You don't have to carry it alone, he said. We're in this together. We've always been. The two men stood there in silence, the weight of their words settling in the air between them. John knew that the path ahead would be difficult, but it was the only way forward. They had the power to shape the future, to make sure that the legacy would live on, but it would require sacrifice and courage. The land, the family, the story, they all depended on them. And for the first time in a long time, John felt a sense of purpose that he hadn't known in years. He was ready. Together, they would protect the legacy, no matter what it took. John and Paul stood together in the dimly lit living room, the weight of their shared responsibility hanging heavily in the air. The future of the family, the legacy that had been entrusted to them, was now in their hands. John knew that they couldn't afford to wait any longer. The path forward was uncertain, but there was no turning back. The legacy wasn't just about protecting a piece of land or maintaining an inheritance. It was about ensuring that Sarah's family's values, their history, and their purpose continued to live on. Paul looked at John, his face a mixture of determination and fear. What now? He asked, his voice hoarse. John took a deep breath. Now, we take action. We can't let fear or doubt stop us from doing what's right. We've been given a chance to make a difference, to protect something far bigger than ourselves. Paul nodded slowly, the weight of the words settling in. I've been holding on to this land for so long. It's all I've known. But now I see that it's not just about the land. It's about the family, the future. It's about what we do with it that matters. John placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. Exactly. And that's why we need to start by coming together. We can't carry this burden alone. We have each other. And we have the strength of the family behind us. The two men stood there for a moment, the silence between them speaking volumes. John could see the shift in Paul's eyes, the realization that they were no longer bound by the past, but had the power to shape the future. The family had lived for so long in the shadows of their ancestors, but now, it was time to step into the light. They had to be the ones to protect the legacy, to ensure that it would be carried forward for generations to come. John walked over to the desk, where the maps and documents still lay spread out before him. His hand hovered over the papers as he thought about the next step. The final piece of the puzzle was still out there. The legacy had always been tied to the land, but now it was about understanding what that truly meant. We need to gather the family, John said, his voice steady. We need to bring everyone together, make sure they understand the gravity of what's at stake. Paul's brow furrowed. Are you sure they'll listen? Some of them. They've been disconnected for so long. They might not understand what we're trying to do. John turned to face him, his gaze unwavering. They will understand. They may have been distant, but they are still family. And it's time for them to realize that this legacy isn't just ours to protect. It's theirs too. They need to know what's been hidden, what we've uncovered, and how it all ties together. Paul sighed, a mix of reluctance and resolve in his expression. I'll reach out to the others. It's time they knew the truth. John nodded. Once we have them here, we can move forward. But we can't wait too long. The land, the legacy, it's all in danger if we don't act soon. As John spoke, a sudden thought struck him. The family had always been divided, each member having their own agenda, their own desires for the land and what it could provide. But this wasn't just about ownership. It was about preservation, about ensuring that the values Sarah's family had held dear were passed on to the next generation. John could feel the weight of this truth pressing on him. The legacy was not just about material wealth. It was about something deeper, something that could not be measured in dollars or land. It was about protecting the essence of what made this family strong. The phone call came the next morning. Paul had managed to reach the family members scattered across the country, and they were all willing to come together for the first time in years. They would meet in the old house, the heart of their family's history, to discuss what had been uncovered and what needed to be done. The news of the legacy had already begun to spread, and John could feel the tension building as the day of the meeting approached. He wasn't sure how the family would react to the revelations, but he knew that the truth had to come out. The time for secrets was over. As the family gathered in the old living room, John felt the weight of their gaze upon him. They looked at him with a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and hope. The room was filled with unfamiliar faces, distant cousins, aunts, uncles, some of whom he had never met. But despite the differences between them, there was one thing they all shared: the family legacy. John stood at the front of the room, his heart racing as he prepared to speak. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside. "What we're about to share may be difficult to understand, but it's the truth. We've uncovered something that's been hidden for generations. The legacy of Sarah's family, the one we've all heard stories about, is not just about land or money. It's about something far more important: our heritage, our values, and the responsibility we carry." The room was silent, the weight of his words sinking in. John could see the disbelief in their eyes, but he also saw the flicker of realization. This was not just a family meeting, it was a turning point. Together, they would decide what to do with the legacy, and John knew that the choices they made here would shape the future for years to come. The room was heavy with silence as John stood before his family. Every eye in the room focused on him. They had come together for this moment, but none of them truly understood what lay ahead. The old house, filled with the ghosts of their ancestors, now felt more like a battleground than a home. The legacy, the responsibility, and the weight of their shared history had been laid bare, and it was clear that the path ahead would not be easy. John's mind raced as he began to speak, the words flowing from him with a quiet authority. "We've all heard stories about this land, about the family that came before us, about the sacrifices that were made. But what we've uncovered isn't just a story, it's our future. This legacy was meant to live on, not as a burden, but as a blessing, and now, it's in our hands to protect it." His voice was steady, though his heart was pounding in his chest. The family, once divided by time and distance, now found themselves united by something far greater than land or wealth. They were united by a purpose, by the responsibility of carrying forward what had been entrusted to them. But as John spoke, he could see the hesitation in their eyes. The weight of what they were being asked to do was too much for some to grasp, too much for others to accept. "I know this is a lot to take in," John continued, his voice softer now, "but we don't have a choice. The legacy of Sarah's family is not just about what's in the past. It's about what we do with it now. We've been given this opportunity, this responsibility, and we have to decide how we're going to carry it forward. The land, the house, the family, everything depends on what we choose today." The room was still, the only sound the faint creaking of the old floorboards beneath their feet. The tension in the air was palpable as each family member grappled with the enormity of what John was saying. They had lived for years in the shadow of their ancestors, but now, the weight of the legacy was being passed down to them. And it wasn't just about protecting what they had. It was about understanding what it meant to be a part of something bigger, something that stretched beyond their own lives. John's gaze shifted to Paul, who stood at the back of the room, his arms crossed over his chest. Paul had always been the skeptical one, the one who resisted change, but now he was watching John closely, as if trying to understand where all of this would lead. "What do we do now?" Paul asked, his voice rough with uncertainty. John looked at him, his heart heavy with the realization of how much they had all lost, but also with the understanding of what they still had to gain. "We move forward," John said, his voice firm. "We come together as a family, and we protect this legacy. We honor the past, but we also build for the future. We've been given the chance to make things right, and we can't waste it." There was a long pause as everyone absorbed his words. Finally, one of the cousins, a woman named Emily, stepped forward. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "What are we really protecting? What do we do with all of this?" John met her gaze, seeing the fear in her eyes, the same fear he had felt when he first discovered the legacy's true meaning. "We're protecting more than land or money," John explained. "We're protecting the values that have been passed down to us. The strength, the loyalty, the love that built this family. It's not about ownership. It's about understanding the importance of what we have and what we stand for. We have the chance to make sure it survives, to make sure it thrives. But it will take all of us, working together, to make it happen." The room was silent again, but this time, the silence felt different. It was a silence of understanding, of acceptance. One by one, the family members nodded, as if the weight of the decision had finally sunk in. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but they were ready to face it together. As the meeting continued, they began to discuss their plans for the future. They talked about how to protect the land, how to ensure that the family's values would be passed down to the next generation, and how to ensure that the legacy would not be lost. It wasn't going to be easy, but they knew it was necessary. And they knew they were no longer just a collection of individuals, but a family united by a purpose. As the meeting came to an end, John felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had come into this house uncertain of what the future held, but now he knew that they were ready. They had the strength, the resolve, and the unity to protect the legacy and ensure that it would live on for generations to come. They had all made a choice, and now it was time to carry it out. With a final glance around the room, John knew that this was just the beginning. The legacy was in their hands now, and it was up to them to make sure it would be honored. Together, they would build a future that honored the past, a future that would stand as a testament to the strength of family and the power of legacy. As the family gathered in the living room, the weight of their decision was finally settling in. The room, once filled with the sounds of old laughter and memories of past gatherings, now felt like a place of reckoning. Each family member seemed lost in their thoughts, processing the gravity of what had just been discussed. The legacy, the responsibility, and the future all rested on their shoulders, and it was clear that the road ahead would be anything but easy. John stood at the front, his mind racing as he looked around at the faces before him. The realization that this was not just about the past, but also about their collective future filled him with a sense of urgency. They had taken the first step in protecting the legacy, but there was still so much more to do. The family, once fragmented, was beginning to come together, but the real challenge was just beginning. "We've made the choice to move forward," John said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "We've chosen to honor the legacy that Sarah's family worked so hard to build. But now, we have to make sure it survives. We have to ensure that the land, the values, the traditions, all of it, continues to thrive. It's not just about owning land or possessions. It's about holding on to what's important, what truly matters." The room was quiet, but there was a sense of agreement in the air. They had all seen the value in John's words, in the importance of carrying the legacy forward, not as a burden, but as an opportunity. But they were also aware of the challenges ahead. The world had changed. The land they held was not just an inheritance. It was part of a larger, more complex puzzle, and they needed to be strategic in how they approached the future. "We're not just going to sit back and let things happen," John continued, his gaze sweeping over his family. "We're going to actively protect this legacy, not just for us, but for those who will come after us. This land, this family, is a living thing. We need to breathe life into it, to make sure it stays strong and prosperous." The words hung in the air as everyone absorbed the depth of what they were about to undertake. Protecting the family's legacy would require more than just effort. It would take a unified vision, dedication, and a willingness to sacrifice. But in that moment, John could see that they were ready. They weren't just fighting for the land. They were fighting for the future of the family, for the values and traditions that had shaped their lives. The next few hours were spent planning, discussing, and strategizing. They spoke of ways to revitalize the land, to bring it back to life after years of neglect. They spoke of how to ensure that the future generations would carry the values of their ancestors, that they would be stewards of the land and guardians of the family's traditions. There were difficult decisions to be made, and many of them were not easy. Some family members had different ideas of how to move forward, but the discussions were productive, and in the end, they came to a consensus. They would work together, using the knowledge of the past to guide them, but they would also embrace the future with open arms. As the meeting came to a close, John felt a sense of accomplishment, but he knew this was only the beginning. The real work lay ahead. The legacy they had agreed to protect wasn't something that could be done in a few short years. It would take a lifetime of commitment, of hard work, and of sacrifice. But as he looked around at the faces of his family, John knew they were ready for the challenge. They had all come to understand that the legacy wasn't just about land or wealth. It was about family, about unity, and about ensuring that the values that had been passed down for generations would not be lost. The family had stood at the crossroads, unsure of where the path would lead, but now they had made their choice. They had chosen to fight for the future, to honor the past, and to protect the legacy that had been entrusted to them. John took a deep breath as he stood in the doorway, looking out at the land that stretched before him. It was no longer just land. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for, everything they had sacrificed. It was their heritage, and now it was up to them to make sure it endured. The weight of the responsibility was heavy, but John felt a sense of peace settle over him. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had found his place, like he knew exactly what he was meant to do. The family had come together, united by a common purpose, and together, they would face whatever challenges the future held. The legacy was no longer a burden. It was a gift that would continue to give for generations to come. As John stepped outside, the air felt different. The wind was calm, and the sun had begun to set, casting a warm glow over the land. It was as if the earth itself was acknowledging their decision, welcoming them into the next chapter of their journey. And for the first time in years, John felt hopeful. The road ahead would be difficult, but he knew they could do it, together. Weeks passed, and with each day, John could feel the weight of the decisions they had made settling deeper into his bones. The family had come together, as he had hoped, and the work to preserve their legacy had begun in earnest. Together, they had started the daunting task of revitalizing the land, working the fields that had once been fertile but had grown barren with time. They had cleared the overgrown paths, restored the old barn, and brought new life to the house. The land, though scarred, was slowly healing, just as their family was. But even as they worked, John couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The legacy they were protecting was not just about land and wealth. It was about the values that had been passed down to them. It was about ensuring that the future generations would understand what it meant to sacrifice, to work hard, and to care for the land as their ancestors had. And that understanding, John realized, had to start with him. He had to lead by example. One evening, after a long day of work, John stood outside the house, staring at the setting sun. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, and the air was cool with the promise of evening. He could hear the sounds of his family moving inside, the clinking of dishes, the soft murmur of voices. But in that moment, he felt a profound sense of solitude. He had come a long way since first stepping foot on the land, and yet he knew there was still so much to do. There was still so much he had to learn, to understand. The legacy wasn't just something to be protected. It was something to be nurtured, something that would require his full commitment. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his responsibility, but also a strange sense of peace. He had made his choice, and he knew that the road ahead would not always be easy. But he was ready. The next day, as the family gathered around the old kitchen table, John shared his thoughts. "We've done a lot of work already," he began, his voice steady. "But this isn't just about restoring the land. It's about restoring the heart of our family, the spirit of what we've always stood for." His eyes swept across the room, meeting the gazes of his relatives. They had all come together with a sense of purpose, but now it was time for them to take that purpose even further. "The land, the house, it's just a part of it," John continued. "The real legacy is in the way we live, the way we treat each other, and the way we pass on what we've learned. We need to teach the next generation what it means to be part of this family, to understand the sacrifices that have been made and the values that have been handed down to us." The room was silent as the family absorbed his words. It was a heavy request, but they all knew it was true. The work they were doing now, the sacrifices they were making, weren't just for themselves. They were for the future, for the generations that would come after them. And in that silence, something shifted. It was as though the family, for the first time, truly understood the weight of what they had been entrusted with. Paul, who had been quiet throughout most of the conversation, spoke up. "You're right," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's not just about the land. It's about everything that came before us, and everything that comes after. We've all been given something here, and it's up to us to protect it, to make sure it survives." John nodded, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when the family truly understood the responsibility they were taking on. And now, with that understanding, they could move forward, together. The days that followed were filled with hard work, but also with a renewed sense of purpose. The family worked side by side, repairing the fences, planting new crops, and restoring the house to its former glory. But more than that, They worked to strengthen the bonds that had been broken over the years. They shared stories, laughed, and remembered the family members who had come before them. And as they worked, John could see it. The legacy wasn't just about the past. It was about the future they were building together. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, John stood at the edge of the property, looking out over the land. The crops they had planted were beginning to sprout, the first signs of new life. The work had been hard, and there was still much to do, but for the first time in a long while, John felt a sense of hope. He had known the land for years, but now it felt like home. He had always thought of it as a place of loss, but now, it was a place of renewal. The legacy, the family, and the land were all intertwined, and John understood now that he was a part of something much larger than himself. He wasn't just preserving the past, he was shaping the future. And as he stood there, watching the sun set behind the mountains, he knew that the legacy they had fought so hard to protect would endure, for their children, for their grandchildren, and for generations to come. The sun had begun to set, casting its warm golden light over the land. John stood in the same spot where he had first looked out over the property, now transformed by months of hard work and determination. The fields stretched before him, the crops he and his family had planted growing strong, evidence of their sacrifice and commitment to the future. The house, once a symbol of loss, now stood as a place of hope, filled with the sounds of laughter and the shared efforts of the family. He had come a long way since the first moment he stepped onto this land, uncertain of what the future held. But now, as he looked around, he knew they had built something lasting. The legacy, once a heavy burden, was now a gift they could all take pride in. The work wasn't finished, and John knew it never would be. There would always be challenges, always something more to protect and preserve. But that was the nature of the legacy. It wasn't something that could be passed on once and forgotten. It was a living, breathing thing, and it required constant care. He turned as he heard footsteps behind him. Paul, his brother-in-law, walked up beside him, his face showing signs of the long days of work, but also a look of quiet satisfaction. "We did it, didn't we?" Paul asked, his voice soft but full of meaning. John nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, we did. We've only just started, but we've built something strong here. Something that will last." Paul let out a small laugh. "You know, I didn't always believe in this. At first, I thought it was just some old story about the past, something that didn't matter anymore. But seeing what we've done, seeing how everyone has come together, I get it now. It's not about what's in the past. It's about what we do with it. It's about carrying it forward for the next generation." John nodded, his gaze drifting back to the horizon. "Exactly. It's not just about preserving the land. It's about preserving everything that came with it. The love, the sacrifice, the values that made this family who we are. We're not just protecting property, Paul. We're protecting a legacy that can shape the future." They stood in silence for a moment, watching as the last light of the day faded away, leaving a peaceful stillness in the air. It felt like the land itself had breathed a sigh of relief, as if it had finally found peace after years of uncertainty. "It's funny," Paul said after a moment. "For the longest time, I didn't understand why we had to hold on to all of this, why it mattered so much. But now I see it. I see how everything is connected, how the land, the family, the future, it's all part of the same story." John smiled again, his heart full. "It always has been. We just had to be ready to see it." The next morning, the family gathered again, this time not to discuss their future, but to celebrate how far they had come. The barn was now fully restored, the fields were green and thriving, and the house was filled with warmth. John stood among them, his heart full of pride and gratitude. His family, the same family that had once been scattered and divided, was now stronger than ever. They had come together, not just to preserve the past, but to build a future. They had embraced the legacy they had been given and made it their own. And as the days passed, John knew that the true strength of their family was in the unity they had found, in their willingness to work together and fight for something greater than themselves. The challenges were far from over, but John felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that whatever came their way, they would face it together. The legacy had been passed down to him, and now he would pass it on to the next generation. And so, the story continued, not as a tale of what had been, but as a living story of what could be, shaped by the hands of those who were willing to protect it, nurture it, and ensure that it would endure for generations to come.